Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Hey Amud Beis 5b of Maseches Kiddushin, and we are 8 lines from the bottom of the page by the 2 dots. The Gemara says, Amar Shmuel. It's actually 9 lines. Amar Shmuel, Shmuel said, Kiddushin, with regards to Kiddushin, betrothal, Nasan la kesef v'shava kesef, if the man gave the wife either kesef, money, or shava kesef, or something that has monetary value, ve'amar lo hare'at mikudeshes, and he said, you are betrothed. But notice he didn't say li, he didn't say to me, he just said, you are betrothed. Hare'at meureses, another language of betrothal. Hare'at le'insu, you are my wife, you are a wife. All these cases he didn't say li, he didn't say to me or my wife. Hare'zu mikudeshes. Still Shmuel says, the Kiddushin works, she's considered betrothed. If he says, Hareini isheich, if he says, I am your husband, Hareini ba'alech, I am, again, your husband, another language of husband, Hareini aruseich, I am your betrothed one, Ein kang beis mechush, there's no room for concern that that's Kiddushin, that's for sure not Kiddushin. If he says, I am your husband, gives her the Kiddushin, says, with this I am your husband, that doesn't work. V'chein begerushin, the same is true at the time of divorce. If he gives her the get and he says, you are now sent forth from the marriage, he doesn't say from the marriage, he doesn't say from me, he just says, Harat Mishulachas, Harat Migurashas, you are, again, divorced, Harat Muteres L'chol Adam, you are permitted to all men, Harezu Migurashas, that works for Gerush and that works for divorce. If he says, however, Eini isheich, he gives her the gang, he says, now I'm not your husband. Eini ba'alech, I'm not your husband. Eini aruseich, I'm not your betrothed one, if they were, I guess, just betrothed. Ein kan beis nechush, there's no concern whatsoever that would be a gerushin. And let's say he would die, and then she would be considered not a divorced woman, but a widow. She would be able to marry a Kohen. We have no concern that that's actually considered a divorce. Amar le Rav Papa Abaye. So Rav Papa said to Abaye with regards to this teaching of Shmuel, Lememra, this seems to say, Desavar Shmuel, that Shmuel holds, Yadayim she'em mochichos habyam yadayim. Yadayim comes from the word like a yad, a handle. It's a hand, but it's also a handle, a yad of a pot. A handle, it means like a short hand, where you say part of something. It's a part of something, and it's a mochichos. It's not clarified, it's not clear. Still, having yadayim counts. So in other words, here he said a partial kiddushin. He said hareat mikudeshes, and it's not even clear if he means to himself. And yet Shmuel said that it works. So he said if it was clear somehow, he didn't say the whole thing, but it was clear what he meant. That's yadayim mochichos. That's a partial statement, but that it's clear and provable. But here he said something that wasn't clear, and yet Shmuel said that it counts, it's Kiddushin. So it seems that Shmuel holds that Yadayim She'em Mochichos, a partial statement, even if it's not Mochiach, it's not clear, it's not clarified, so still it works. So to that he asks, Vehatnam, but we learned in a Mishnah, the Mishnah says, Ha'omer Ahei, if somebody says, I will be one, Harezeh Nazir. The Mishnah says, it's a Mishnah Nazir, he's considered a Nazir. He says, Ahei, I will be one, he's a Nazir. And we asked about that. The Gemara, I think there in Nazir asks, V'dilma Ahei B'tainis. Maybe he means I'll be in a fast. Who says when he says, I will be one, that he means a Nazir? V'dilma Ahei B'tainis Ka'amar. Maybe he means I'll be fasting. V'amar Shmuel. So Shmuel explained, Behu shahaya nazir over lefanav. It's talking about where there was a nazir walking in front of him. If a nazir crosses his path and he says, hey, I'm going to be that, I'm that, I'll be one of those, so then we know what he means, even though he didn't say the full words, I'll be a nazir, a nazirite, but he says, hey, I'll be one, so there we know what he means. So Shmuel says that's what it's talking about. Says the Gemara, Taima de nazir over lefanav. We see the reason why that works to say hey, a partial statement, is because there was a Nazir walking in front of him. Halav hachi, but if not for the fact that there was a nazir there, hello, then it wouldn't work. So yadayim shemochichos lo hadin yadayim. A partial statement that's not clear what it means. You see Shmuel holds, that was Shmuel who said it over there. He explained with regards to nazir that it has to be that the nazir is passing in front. You see Shmuel holds that if you have a partial statement that's not clear, it's not considered, we don't consider the statement even if he may have intended something. So here too, saying Harat Mekudeshes shouldn't be enough. It's Yadayim Shem Mochichos. It's a partial statement that's not clear exactly what it means. So the Gemara says, Hachabayaskinan de Amarli. What are we dealing with here? We actually said li. He said Harat Mekudeshes li. Harat Mereses li. He said the proper formula. It's true. If he says a partial formula and it's not clear, Shmuel would say it's not Kiddushin. Here he meant, he may not have said it, but he meant where he says Harat, meaning he, Shmuel, meant to say that the man said Harat Mekudeshes li, that's where it's Kiddushin. So the Gemara asks, Ihachi mai kamashmalan. So if that's the case, then what is it coming to teach me? Obviously, we know that. We know if you say, that's what you're supposed to say, Harat Mekudeshes li. So what would Shmuel be coming to teach me then? So the Gemara says, Hani, and now we're on the top of the next page, Hani lishni basrai kamashmalan. He was really coming to teach me the other side of things. He wasn't teaching me a din, a law with regards to what you say for Kiddushin. He's teaching me a law of things that you might say that don't work. He says, if you say these things, yeah, that's what works. We know that works. But if you say, Eini isheich, I'm not your husband, Eini baalech, I'm not your husband, your baal, Eini aruseich, that doesn't work. That's what Shmuel was coming to teach me, the second half. And why doesn't it work? So the Gemara explains, because hachaksiv ki yikach velo sheyikach. With regards to marrying, to marriage and Kiddushin, it says, when a man takes a wife, velo sheyikach es atzmo. It doesn't say that when he takes himself to his wife. It says when he takes the wife. Sorry, I was giving you the examples of Gittin. That's going to be the next example. But what about the examples of Kiddushin is where he says, I am your husband, I will be Hareini Isheich, Hareini Baalech, I am your husband. I am your betrothed one. That's where we say it doesn't work. And why not? Because the pasuk says ki yikach, when a man takes a wife, he has to bring her to him. Hareat Mekudeshes li, not Hareini Baalech. You don't say, I am now your husband. That is sheyikach es atzmo, not where you take yourself, where the man takes himself to the wife. So that's why it doesn't work to say, I will be your husband. And with regards to Gitting, the same thing. V'hacha, and here by Gitting, ksiv, it says Vishalcha, he should give her a get and send her forth. V'lo shishach es atzmo, but it doesn't say that he sends himself. So he can't, it's about separating her, not about separating himself. So he has to say, Hare at migureshes, you are divorced, and he can't say, Hare ani eini balech, I'm not your husband, or something like that. Eini sheikh, that's separating himself. It has to be that's sending himself forth. It has to be that he's sending her forth. That's what Shmuel was coming to teach. The Gemara continues 3 lines down, quotes a brisa. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Hare at ishti, if the man says, you are my wife. Hare at arusasi, you are my betrothed one. Hare at knuyali, you are acquired to me. Mikudeshes, all of those languages work for the Kiddushin. Again, this is accompanied by giving something for Kiddushin, but these languages work. Hare at sheli, if he says, you are mine. Hare at birshusi, you are in my domain. Hare at zikukali, you are bound to me. Mikudeshes, that too works for Kiddushin, the brisa says. So ask the Gemara, we gave 3 things, we said that works for Kiddushin, and then we gave 3 things, and we said that works for Kiddushin. So ask the Gemara, it should have listed them all. Just list them all off and say those things work for Kiddushin. It's almost like we were expecting the second 3 not to work, right? It says these 3 things work, and these 3 things work. Why didn't you just put them all together and say these 6 things work? Says the Gemara, Tana tlas shaminu v'garsinu. The reason is because this Tana, this sage who taught this, he learned them in separate instances. So he learned 3. So he taught those 3 together, and he learned 3 somewhere else, different time, and he taught those 3 together. That's why in this brisa, they are recorded separately. Ibayelu. The Gemara says there was a question raised. Miyuchedes li mahu. If a man says, you are miyuchedes li, you are designated to me, you are one with me. So Rashi tells us that, and a few of these examples are coming from Bereshis, from the creation of Adam and Chava, and them coming together. And there the pasuk says, "V'yulu b'sar echad," right? They'll be like one flesh. So he's using that language, one. Miyuchad, it means designated, but it's similar to the word echad, one. So that's at least how Rashi understands that. So does that work? Miyuedesli. What if he says another term of designation? This actually comes from the section of Ama Ivriya, of the Jewish maidservant, which we've spoken about, where after they purchase the girl, later they're supposed to marry her, either the father or the son, and there the language is Asher lo ye'ada, if he doesn't miyayid her, and that's a language of designating her as a wife. So let's say somebody uses that language in Kiddushin. He says, miyuedesli, you should be designated for me. Mahu. Does that work? Ezrasi mahu. What if he says you should be my helper? From the word ezer kenegdo, also in the creation. God says, I'm going to create aselo ezer kenegdo. I'll create a helpmate opposite him. So if he says a helpmate, Ezrasi, he says to the woman, you should be my helpmate. Does that work? Negdasi mahu. The one who's opposite me. Does that work? Because also, ezer kenegdo. You should be kenegdo. You should be the one opposite me. My counterpart. Does that work? Atsurasi mahu. What if he says atsurasi? Rashi says this comes from the language of atzeres, which means like a gathering. So you're the one gathered to me. Does that work? Salasi mahu. What if he says my side, right? Because that's how Chava was created from Adam, from his side, from his rib. That Hashem takes the tzela, the side of Adam to create Chava. So if a man says, you are my side, does that work for Kiddushin? Sigurasi mahu. What if he says, you are my closed one? There also from the pasuk by Chava, it says that Hashem took, Vayikach achas mitzalos, Hashem took one of his ribs, Vayiskor basar tachtan, he closed up the flesh under it. They did the first surgery. So, again, in the context of creating a wife, there was this language of saguras, of vayiskor. It's a little bit out of context here to call her that, because there it seems to be referring to Adam's own flesh being sealed up. But in any event, it's, I guess, the context of marriage, so the one who caused sealing of the flesh, Ma'u, does that work if a man tells his wife that? Does that work for Kiddushin? Tachti Ma'u, the one under me. Again, from Vayiskor Basar Tachtena, the same pasuk, Hashem sealed the flesh under. Oh, maybe it's Tachtena, it's under her. So I guess it is referring to her. So under her, Ma'u. If he says, again, referring to that pasuk, Vayiskor Basar Tachtena, I still think that pasuk is talking about sealing the flesh of Adam, though. So again, it's a little bit strange, but in the context of the creation of Chava, it says the word tachtena under the flesh that was taken from Adam. So does that work to refer to Chava, for a man to refer to his wife in that way? Does that work for Kiddushin? Tfusasi mahu. If a man says, you are my grabbed one, does that work? Lekuchasi mahu. If he says, you are my taking one, does that work for Kiddushin? So the Gemara says, as all these questions, the Gemara says, Pshot miha chada. Let's at least answer one of them. Titania, because we have a brisa, it says, Ha'omar lekuchasi harezu mikudeshes. If a person gives Kiddushin and says, you are lekuchasi, my taking one, that works. Mishum shenemar, because the pasuk says, Ki yikach ish isha. When a man takes a wife, that's the language of the pasuk of lekicha, of taking, so at least lekuchasi takes. So that last question that we had, that we have a brisa that teaches us that it works. We go and continue with the questions. They asked, charufasi mahu. What if a person says, my charufa? Also like a language of a spouse of some sort. Comes from a pasuk. The pasuk says, Vehi isha necharefes leish. And she's a woman who is necharefes, that's designated to a man, or espoused to a man. And there's a question whether that's talking about Kiddushin or not. And it's dependent on a Gemara in Gittin of whether that verse is speaking about a Shifcha Kananis, a non-Jewish maidservant who Kiddushin doesn't work? You can't do Kiddushin to a non-Jew. Or is it talking about someone who is, I think Rashi says here, half acquired, half free, excuse me. She's still half shifcha, but half free, so there's a partial, that you have to look at that Gemara to understand what it means to be half free, how that can work. Maybe if it's where you have two omers and one of them freed her. So there's like a part of her that she's now, after a shifcha kananis is set free, when a non-Jewish slave is set free, they actually complete their conversion. So she has half of her that's now Kiddushin works. So there's a question in the Gemara in Gittin whether this pasuk is dealing with a full shifcha kananis where Kiddushin wouldn't work. She's completely not a non-Jewish maidservant. Kiddushin wouldn't work, or if she partially freed, then Kiddushin would work. So that's where the language comes from, and we'll come back to that little discussion in a moment. So the Gemara says, what is the story if somebody says, you should be my charufa? And that's the language of that verse, necharefes leish. You should be my charufa. So the Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen, we have a brisa, Detanya, ha'omer charufasi, nikudeshes. If a person says, you are my charufa, gives Kiddushin, that works for Kiddushin. Why? Shekein b'Yehuda koren la'arusa charufa. The Gemara says, because in the lands of Yehuda, in Judea, they use that word to refer to Arusa, to refer to someone who's betrothed. So that's what it means. That's what they mean when they say it. They mean betrothed. People know that's what it means. And therefore, that language of Charufa works. Asks the Gemara of Yehuda, Havya Ruba Da'alma. Very nice, in Yehuda it should work. But is Yehuda a majority of the world? That should, that somehow you have a majority, you refer to it this way. No, Yehuda is not a majority of the world. So just because they refer to it that way in Yehuda, but how could you make a blanket statement that Ha'omer Charufasi Mikudeshes? If you say this language, it's Kiddushin, which sounds like it's true everywhere. Yehuda is not a majority, and the majority of the world doesn't use the word Charufa to refer to a betrothed woman. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar. This is what the Brisa was saying. Ha'omer Charufasi Mikudeshes. Somebody who says, you are my charufa, is mikudeshes. Kiddushin works. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, and now it quotes that verse, V'hi shivcha necharefes leish. She is a maidservant who is necharefes, who is, again, designated or betrothed, espoused to a man. So we see that it's a language of espousing, of betrothal, and it works. The Ode, the Gemara goes on and says, and furthermore, that's what the Brisa meant. The Brisa meant the reason why it works is because there's a pasuk. And furthermore, Yehuda karin arusa charufa. And furthermore, in Yehuda they refer to a arusa as a charufa. So we can back that up, and that we even have a place where they use it, where they use that terminology. Asks the Gemara, Yehuda ve'od lekra. The fact that they use that term in Yehuda somehow buttresses the proof from the pasuk. Like, isn't a verse in the Torah sufficient that we see that this is a language of Kiddushin? So Ela Hachi Kamer. So this is what the Gemara was saying when it quoted that verse, and it mentioned Yehuda. Ha'omer charufasi b'Yehuda mikudeshes shekein b'Yehuda karin la'arusa charufa. So we're going all the way back to the beginning. We're restarting over. Really, because remember, the Brisa specifically mentioned Yehuda. That's the problem here. The Brisa doesn't mention the pasuk. The Gemara is Hachi Kamar. The Gemara said this is what it meant. It meant there's a pasuk, and also they mention it. They refer to it that way in Yehuda. Well, if you have a pasuk, then it's not important that they refer to it that way in Yehuda. So at the end of the day, what's the Brisa saying? The Brisa only mentioned the fact that they refer to an arusa, betrothed woman, as a charufa in Yehuda. So what's the Brisa saying? If I have a pasuk, that's all I need. It should have just quoted the pasuk. So the Gemara is saying, no. Originally when the Gemara tried to bring in the pasuk, it was understanding that the pasuk is talking about the maidservant who is half freed. And it was going with that opinion. And therefore there is a concept of Kiddushin by such a woman, because she's half fully Jewish at this point. Half of her has been through conversion. So there is some level, a half effect of Kiddushin. So originally the Gemara, when it brought in the pasuk, was saying that's why Kiddushin works with this language of charufa, because we see this pasuk, this verse says necharefes leishing, it means Kiddushin. But the Gemara says, but the Bryce is not saying that. The Bryce is only talking about Yehuda. So now the Gemara is saying, oh, really? Actually, this Bryce holds that pasuk is not talking about someone who's half-breed. It's talking about a full shifcha kananis. She's completely a non-Jewish maidservant, and Kiddushin doesn't work at all. And that's why you can't bring a proof from the pasuk. And your question, it should only be true in Yehuda. The Gemara is not saying that's actually what the Brisa meant. What the Brisa meant was Elahachi Kamer, what it's saying, Ha'omer Charufasi b'Yehuda Mekudeshes. If you live in the lands of Yehuda and you say, you are my Charufa, and you use this language, that's what the Brisa is saying. That's Mekudeshes. That works, but only in the lands of Yehuda. Shekain b'Yehuda Korin La'arusa Charufa. Because in the lands of Yehuda, they call an Arusa a Charufa, they call a betrothed woman a Charufa, and so that language works in Yehuda specifically. But elsewhere, it would not work. That's the conclusion of our understanding of the Brisa. Asks the Gemara, all these questions that we have a bunch of open-ended questions, right? About if he says miyuchedes, if he says miyuedis, if he says esrasi, negdasi, atzarasi, all these questions are still open-ended. We don't have an answer, but ask the Gemara b'may askina. What's the case? Let's try to understand the case that we're dealing with, where he used this sort of language. Let's say the case is he wasn't speaking to her about a get or about Kiddushin. Get is I think just thrown in here. Really, we're talking about Kiddushin here. Let's say he wasn't talking about, they weren't discussing getting married before he said these words. So then Mina Yada. So how does he know what he's talking? How does she know what he's talking about? If he says, he gives her something and he says, Ezrasi, can you be my helper? How does he know that? How is she supposed to know what he means? Or he says, can you be my side? Can you be my? Can you be designated to me? How does she know what he means? So you'll tell me they were talking about marriage. They were discussing their future plans, their dreams for the future together, and then he said, here's a ring, will you be my helper? Will you be my side? Will you be designated to me? So then, if it's medaber al iske gita v'kiddusha, then afal gav delomer lanami. Then he doesn't even have to say anything, the Gemara says, and it works. Ditna, because we have a Mishnah, the Mishnah says, Haya medaber im isha iske gita v'kiddusha. If a man was discussing with a woman matters of either Kiddushin or get, and then he gave her get. After discussing that they're going to get divorced, he gives her a document and he doesn't say anything. Or after discussing that they're going to get married and engaged, he gives her Kiddushin and he doesn't say anything. Below Pirish, and he doesn't explain what he's doing. Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo. Rabbi Yossi says it's enough. The fact that they were discussing Gitting or Kiddushin, it's enough that he now gives her the thing without saying anything. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Tzarech Lefarish. Rabbi Yehuda though says no. Rabbi Yehuda says he has to explain what he's doing. It's not enough just that they were talking about it and now he gives it. He has to explain. But who do we paskin like? Who do we rule like? The Amar Rabbi Huna Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Huna said in the name of Shmuel, Halacha Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is like Rabbi Yossi that he doesn't have to say anything. If they were discussing marriage right before, then he gives it to her, he doesn't have to say anything. So if he doesn't have to say anything, so what's the question? We said if he says you should be my helper, gives her Kiddushin, we asked, does that work? So we say, what's the question? If they weren't discussing marriage, then she has no idea what he's talking about. So obviously it doesn't work. If they were discussing marriage, then he doesn't have to say anything. So of course it works. So the Gemara says, Amri will say ve'olam b'medaber imal iskei gita v'kiddusha. They were talking about Gitting or Kiddushin. Or in our case, they were talking about Kiddushin. They were talking about marriage and their dreams of marriage together. And had he given it to her and not said anything, then absolutely. That's what we were talking about in that Mishnah. That's Rabbi Yossi. That works. That's Kiddushin. But here, what are we dealing with? Where do we have a question? He gave it to her, the Amar la Bahani Lishni. And he used one of these Lashonas, one of these languages that we have a question about. He said, you should be designated to me, you should be my helper, you should be my side. And the question is, Hani Lishni, when he uses such a language, what does that language mean? Likidushi Kamarla? Is it a language of Kiddushin? Can we consider it a language of Kiddushin? O Dilma Limulacha Kamarla? Or maybe he means just to hire her for work. Right? If he gives her some money and he says, can you be my helper? Maybe he just means, can you, that's at least the most blatant one, but some of these other ones as well. You should be designated to me. Maybe he just means he wants to hire her. So that's our question. What does he mean? Meaning the fact that they were just discussing marriage, and then he gives her something, so if he doesn't say anything, so he means marriage. But if he says something that actually could mean, I want to hire you for work, so then maybe he's not dealing with marriage anymore. They were talking about marriage, now he means something else. That's our question. Does that work? And the Gemara says, Teku, the Gemara remains off with the question, we don't know if those other languages work in the context of where they were already discussing marriage. If they weren't discussing marriage, they for sure don't work. She doesn't know what he's talking about. If they were discussing marriage, if he was silent, it would work to give Kiddushin. But if he says one of these languages that may mean that he just wants to hire her, then it may not work for Kiddushin. Gufa. The Gemara says we're going to examine this brisa itself. This Mishnah really. The Mishnah said if he was speaking with her on matters of get, of divorce, Kiddushin and marriage, then he gave her get, her divorce bill, he gave her Kiddushin, and he didn't explain what he's doing. Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo. Rabbi Yossi said it's enough. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Tzarech Lefarish. Rabbi Yehuda says he has to explain what he's doing. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, V'hu she'asukim ba'oso inyan. That which Rabbi Yossi says it works, they have to still be talking about that matter. If they were talking about marriage and then they started talking about the weather, and then he gave it to her, that doesn't work. It has to be that they're adaying asukim ba'oso inyan. They're still talking about it, and then he gives it to her. That's the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. V'chein Amar Rabbi Lazar Amar Rabbi Oshia, V'hu she'asukim ba'oso inyan. And Rabbi Lazar in the name of Rabbi Oshia also said that it only works where they're asukin ba'oso inyan. They are discussing the same matter. They're still talking about marriage. But if they interrupt it with a different topic, then it doesn't work. The Gemara says, Kitanai. This is actually a machlokas a dispute between Tanayim. The sages of the Mishnah. Rabbi Omer v'hu she'asukim ba'oso inyan. Rabbi said, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said it only works to just hand it to her without explaining if they were still discussing, if they just got left off from talking about marriage. Rabbi Lazar by Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Lazar, the same of Rabbi Shimon says, even if they're no longer discussing that matter, they took a break to talk about the weather, still it works to give the Kiddushin. Ask the Gemara, V'yulabda asukim ba'oso inyan mina yada, Maika Amarla. How could that be? How could Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon say that even though they're not asukim ba'oso inyan, they're not talking about marriage anymore, still if he doesn't say anything, it still works? How does she know then what he's talking about? If they were talking about marriage and then now they're talking about the weather and then he gives her something without saying anything, how could that work? How could she know that that's for Kiddushin? So Amar Abaye said, Me inyan le'inyan ba'oso inyan. Abaye said, no, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon never meant that if they're not talking about anything to do with marriage, that Kiddushin would work. What he meant was that they don't have to be talking about Kiddushin anymore. According to the first opinion, it's not just enough to be talking about marriage. They actually have to be talking about Kiddushin still, and then he gives it to her. That works. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon says, no, they don't have to be talking about Kiddushin anymore. They could be talking about other things related to the match and the marriage. They could be talking about the dowry or something like that. It's may inyan le'inyan, it's topic to topic, may also inyan, but related to the same general topic. That's where it works to give the Kiddushin, even though they're no longer talking about Kiddushin anymore, and to give it without saying anything. That's the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Shmuel. Rav Huna said in the name of Shmuel, Halacha k'Rabbi Yossi. Halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, that we mentioned above, that this general opinion that you can give Kiddushin without saying anything if you were previously discussing matters of Kiddushin. Amar li Rav Yemer li Rav Ashi. So Rav Yemer said to Rav Ashi, Ve'lahada Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now that which Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kol she'eni yodea b'tiv gittim v'kiddushin Lo yehei lo esek imahem. If a person doesn't know the details of the laws of get and the laws of Kiddushin, he shouldn't be involved in it. In other words, he shouldn't be the dayan, the judge, or the overseeing rabbi, if he doesn't know the halachos. So he's asking, we know that that's a statement, we know that that's true, you have to know the halachos of Gittin to oversee it, and Kiddushin. So he says, Afilu lo shmiele had Rav Huna Amar Shmuel. Would we say that that's true, even if you don't know the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, who said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, since it's so uncommon anyways for a person to give a get or to give Kiddushin without saying anything, it's true, if they were just discussing that, then that would work, but does he really need to know that? Is that important? When we say you have to know the halachos, do we include this halacha, since it's so uncommon? Amarle, so he said back, Rav Ashi said back to Rav Yemar, yes, hachinami, this too. Even though it's not so common, but it's important for him to know this halacha. I don't know if it's specifically this halacha, or if he just means, everything. We want him to know everything. But he said, yeah, he even needs to know this halacha. Okay, and now we know this halacha. All right, have a great week. I'll see you next time.